Hey, this is Blake Chastain, and you're listening to Let's Talk About Text. It's a show where Scott Okamoto and I talk with our guests about what we're reading. That's the whole deal. You're up to speed. Here's the show.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About Text. This is our second full episode, and we are really excited to have the co-creators of the Dauntless Media Empire, which is a rival of the current media empire that you're listening to right now. But there's no bad blood. We may talk a little smack. We may post up and talk a little trash, but it's a friendly rivalry. So I'm really happy to bring in Nate Nakao and Gail M of the Full Mutuality podcast. Welcome, y'all.
Thanks for having me.
Scott. By the way, you are double dipping, so careful what you say about the other side.
I know. I have a foot in each world now. Thanks a lot, Blake. You brought me into this.
Yeah. made the turf war a little more complicated for you.
It's like that library in Vermont that straddles the border between the U.S. and Canada, and
I was not aware of this library.
And Scott can just jump ship to Axis, and that ship is much bigger than than Irreverent, at least. Sure.
That's for nerds. So
fair enough.
It's a different kind of nerd.
Yeah.
Well, on this show, Let's Talk About Text, we really just want to celebrate reading and to talk about what people are reading. It doesn't have to be a new book. It doesn't have to be timely. It's okay if it's both of those things. But the exciting thing is just to talk to other readers about what they're reading. And that's what this show is all about. We didn't decide what the order was going to be.
No, we didn't draw straws or anything like that.
We didn't draw. See, we're still working out the kinks.
Well, I had to go first last time, so I'm not going to go first. That's all I know.
Okay, so you don't want to go first.
I think. Well, so we were talking before we hit record. we have different kinds of books that we're sharing, and Gail says she has a serious one, and I think, because we do this to help us cope with the current realities, whether that's delving into something like fantasy in a completely other world or universe, or some of us take comfort in reading about what's happening now to give us clarity, or at least give us a game plan. And I'm assuming that's what Gail's book is. So we can start with Gail, and she can share what she's reading.
Sure. I'll maybe even give some of the context, so it makes it more interesting on why I picked that and how it ties into context. But so today is actually Canadian Election Day.
Yes.
And I just moved to the U.S., assumed citizenship, was, all excited
what were
to
you
actually.
Thinking?
I know. And the timing couldn't have been crazier. And I definitely, assumed citizenship before the vote. That happened in the U.S., so I could vote for Kamala, and it was a huge letdown and disappointing. So I'm watching tonight's election, with a lot of the same anxiety, being a dual citizen in both countries. But I definitely didn't have on my bingo card in moving to the U.S. Trump threatening to annex Canada and make it its 51st state, on the daily, and it kind of quieted down recently because his talk was actually swinging the election the other way in Canada. Like, the party that was set to lose, which was the Liberal Party that was governing, had been governing for a while, was basically gonna be, they were set to lose. And then Trump started threatening to annex Canada, and then the Conservative Party, which had all the momentum, it completely started dropping off. So recently Trump has been very quiet. I think maybe his inner circle has been like, you're actually making this go the other way. So just try and tamper down with that for a bit. And it actually has worked to, just giving some background, make the political momentum start picking up on the other side. The Conservatives have been making some gains recently. But today, of course, Trump could not refrain from putting up a post, a tweet, because it's election day. He couldn't shut up for too long, so he had to do He couldn't. He was like, "Vote for me, guys! Vote for me, Canada! I want to make you the 51st." So he had to go back to his 51st state, tweet today or True Social, 'cause that's where he puts his nonsense. But yeah, so moving into the U.S., kind of watching what's been happening as Trump has taken over. Nate and I were in Atlanta recently with a bunch of friends, and we went to go visit MLK's birthplace. We saw his home, we saw the church, we saw the museum, and as I was walking around in it, kind of learning about MLK, I was inspired. I was like, okay, just in terms of U.S. history, in terms of movements in the past for resistance, for change, and obstacles people faced that looked insurmountable, and like, what did resistance look like? So as I was walking through, I think getting to the end of, they kind of had some of it chronologically, looking at the end of MLK's life and how he started getting very intersectional. He started his Poor People's Campaign right near the end of his life, and he was talking about living wages. And one of the times he was jailed, he was talking to the white jailers and saying, like, you guys are living in poverty. You should be joining us. Like, this is about you too. This is about everybody. And just understanding, how the systems of oppression affect everyone, what intersectionality means. Like, he started that before we maybe even had that word. I don't know when intersectional, I can't say when that word started. But anyway, reading about his life, looking through his history was inspiring to me. It gave me thoughts of like, what does it mean at becoming an American to make a difference in this culture, right? I'm Canadian. Now I'm both. So I'm like, okay, how do I look back at what work has been done and what it could teach us? Came back home. And then I just started reading about Malcolm X. Did his autobiography, was like 20 hours of reading, and watched the Spike Lee, condensed version of his life story, and then started thinking about the juxtaposition of those two characters and how they're often pitted against each other, especially in civil rights. And so there was a book. I had a bunch of Audible credits stacked up. So there was this book called "The Sword and the Shield." It's by Peniel E. Joseph. I had looked up how to pronounce his name before this because I get names bad, but it's called The Sword and the Shield. And it is, what's fascinating about it is when you look at both of their lives individually, they had very different approaches, and different philosophies, but then there's so much in common, but people often pit them against each other, and it's kind of easy to do because Malcolm X was very vocally critical of some of Martin Luther King's positions and of him, and so what this book has been for me and how it's been fascinating is, instead, like, I read and was learning about both of them separately. But this book chronologicals both of their lives, but interspersed, chronologically, and how they had such a big impact on each other, rather than those kind of positions people give of like Martin Luther King was nonviolence, Malcolm X was more extreme, and people like to do that kind of a thing. This book sort of actually. One of my favorite MLK quotes is that all life is interrelated, and how we're caught in a web of mutuality with each other. And so this book sort of highlights how both of these men transformed each other's thinking. And as time went on, MLK looked a lot more like Malcolm X near the end of his life. And of course, even Malcolm X's assassination obviously played on him, on his thinking, on his thought process. It was a pivotal changing point. And vice, even towards the end of Malcolm X's life, he went to go visit Martin Luther King in jail, talk with Coretta Scott King, and he started doing some reach outs in that direction, and offered support. And things where in the past they were just on totally looked like opposite ends. But what was interesting was also looking at how they had very different approaches, also based on their lives. Like, you're talking about Martin Luther King in the South, where there's segregation. This is where he's grown up. This is what he's dealing with. The bus boycotts, the freedom rides. He's dealing with segregation in the South. And Malcolm X, his story is interesting because, like me, he grew up in the system. He was taken away from his parents, and he grew up in the North, where there wasn't segregation, but like the discrimination was so. It wasn't obvious, or it wasn't visible in the same ways it was in the South, but it was even worse in some ways. And so, he was dealing with a lot of invisible systems and barriers. So their approaches looked very different based on their life experience, based on where they were. And I think when that helps me as I've been studying their life and the chronology and how they tie in together and how their different perspectives actually impacted each other a lot. And more as the timeline went on. it's a reminder to me that there isn't always one exact way. I think whereas people were often like, who's the leaders right now currently that we can follow that are going to give us the direction, right? Of like how to change society. Like who are the people, in charge that, we could look to. But like, I think one of the neat things with Black Lives Matter is it wasn't one person, right? You couldn't just kill off a leader. It was like the idea of this is multiple, this is all of us working together. This has to be intersectional or it's not going to be meaningful, And so, yeah, that's been, I guess, some of the interesting parts of the book that I've been reading has just been seeing how, how there's multiple angles to come at things from, and it's sometimes finding where you fit, which life experience you've had and what direction you should take, and understanding everyone working together, even with their own angles and their own directions at how they come at things, actually is helpful to the overall. And it's not going to be finding that one leader has the perfect right take, So that has been enlightening and encouraging and insightful. And I strongly encourage anyone who's interested in learning about either of them to read this book and read their stories together, because I think it's a much fuller. I think if you're into history, it's fun when you narrow in on a favorite topic, but then if something else ties into that somehow and you're able to like get into this whole other side of things, then it enriches the picture that you already had and how that plays into a bigger context. So yeah, I guess that's my long and short of the book that I've been reading.
Yeah, depending on which state you live in, you might have a hard time finding this book because it's probably going to be on a lot of lists of banned books.
That
in red
is sadly
states.
true.
Yeah.
He actually wrote it before the pandemic and before the Black Lives Matter recent resurgence of it in 2020, because I know it's been before that.
I googled it while you were talking, and it's saying originally published on March 31st, 2020. So that was before George Floyd's murder and the subsequent uprisings and protests in response. But that's a really fascinating idea to write a biography of two people and sort of their interrelationship. So this is definitely you've sold me.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating.
This is definitely being added to the TBR pile for sure.
Especially as in this day and age where like conservatives try to co-opt the legacy of people like MLK and use it for their purposes, and reading about the real facts about what he said and what he stood for. It may not win the day these days, but at least we can fight back with the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why books are so great, just because they hold that. And
that's why they get burned.
We document our history. Yes.
Because they hold that.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, that was a great lead off book. Nate, would you like to go, or do you want me to step into the hot seat?
I think you should go because you're funny, because I was talking about Canada and yours. There's a tie-in with our two.
Right. But except that I have two books.
All right. If there's
I forgot to say in my intro that Nate and Gail are sitting next to each other because they're married. And to Nate's credit, Gail came and moved here and assumed citizenship in the worst country in the world right now for Nate. So that speaks volumes for the quality of human being that Nate is.
Yeah,
to be fair,
100%. Well said.
When she assumed citizenship, we were looking at the potential of our first woman president. So
true.
It wasn't all bad when she made the decision.
But she's still
I'm still here.
Still there. So.
Yeah, she's still here. So that's where she gets the credit.
Yeah.
Okay, so before I get into that book that Gail was mentioning, I am reading this novel called Yellowface.
Oh.
Yeah, by R.F. Kuang. She's most known for her fantasy books. She has this trilogy of books called the Poppy War trilogy. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my TBR list. But this is a little bit more accessible than like a massive fantasy trilogy. So I picked it up. I honestly had no idea what to expect. and it's gripping right from the first chapter. Essentially, and these aren't really spoilers because this stuff is on the back of the jacket.
Okay, fair game.
So, but I suppose I should say spoiler alert because there's a pretty big plot device that happens, but it is listed right here
Yeah, it's on
in
the
the
back
book
of the book.
description.
Yeah.
It's on the jacket. So, the main character, the perspective character, and it's written in first person, is this woman named Junie Hayward, and she and her friend Athena Liu, they're both novelists, and they're supposed to be up and coming rising stars around the same time. But Athena Liu ends up being like the media darling. She has bestseller hit after bestseller hit, and Junie Hayward doesn't. She's sort of trying to get published, working really hard. And then one night, Junie and Athena are out. They get plastered. They go back to Athena's apartment, and Athena chokes on some snack that she's eating and ends up dying right in front of Junie. And in that moment, she finds herself in her apartment, and she had just previewed Athena's new book, and it's an incredible book, but it has a lot to do with Chinese history. And Junie decides to take that manuscript because nobody else has seen the manuscript and do her own editing and assume it as her own book. She pitches it. It's instantly seen as a bestseller. And now she's living the life that was supposed to be Athena's through this potential bestseller book that's all about Chinese history, but it's through the lens of a white novelist who is now dealing with all of the potential pitfalls of writing a book on Chinese history. So I'm only about a quarter of the way through, and it's pretty gripping. Every chapter has that sort of like cliffhanger kind of vibe to it where you're like, okay, I really want to. In fact, last night I stayed up till 2 a.m. reading one chapter after another.
Wow.
I think I went through like three chapters in a sitting. I usually tell myself to stop, but I just needed to know what happened next. So,
Wow.
so that's
Keeping Nate up in the wee hours of the night.
yeah.
That's an
Sign of a
endorsement.
good book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. And then the book that Gail was talking about that I'm reading currently, it's more of an academic book. And a little background on this one. So I started a new podcast called Asians in Hockey, and I have to thank Scott for this. So Scott is triple dipping in.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I wanted to say that earlier. I was like, actually,
I'm a podcast whore. In the best sense.
Yeah. and now I'm double dipping because I've officially joined that network as well.
You're just non-monogamous.
yeah, I was gonna say you guys have a poly.
It's an
poly
Asian
thing going.
American podcast group. So
It is. So the podcast is called Asians in Hockey, and as part of this this podcast, I was doing some research into kind of the history of Asian Americans and Asian Canadians in the sport of hockey, and not just at the elite levels. And there are some stories that are out there that are really fascinating. So I guess to kind of juxtapose it against what Scott's doing with Asians in baseball, well,
Which is what got you into.
Scott Kim and Naomi, and that was my inspiration for Asians in hockey. But what you three are doing on Asians in baseball and what I'm looking into on Asians in hockey, it is a little different in that the landscape of Asians entering major elite baseball leagues in North America, for instance, is a lot of importing. It's a lot of transfer from Japan, Korea, China. They're coming to the U.S. and Canada to play
as stars.
as stars, right? Whereas in hockey, they are homegrown talent who are very often Hapa, and
That means half
Yes.
Asian and half something else.
correct. Thanks, Scott. They because hockey really finds its roots in North America. And granted, there are some Northwestern European countries that are very good at hockey, and then of course Russia is also very good at hockey. But as far as Asian representation, a lot of it is in North America. So there's this book by Dr. Courtney Szto called "Changing on the Fly: Hockey Through the Voices of South Asian Canadians," and it's a pretty long book. It's very academic in its tone, but it goes through surveys and literary reviews and, of course, observation of media to kind of look at the landscape of hockey as sort of the cultural entry point for Canada and Canada's kind of approach to itself or belief in itself as a multicultural, multi-ethnic, diverse society. And this book kind of interrogates all of that and interrogates the idea that hockey in particular and sports in general are sort of neutral or great unifiers, just inherently have positive impacts on society, when in fact it has often served as a gatekeeper, preventing racial minorities and gender minorities into its arenas. And what does it look like when non-white people enter these spaces? And for this book, particularly South Asian Canadians, one thing that was really fascinating to learn is that the third largest hockey broadcast in Canada, next to English and French, is Punjabi. And they have a massive following, and they have their own sort of side-by-side broadcast to Canada's biggest show, which is Hockey Night in Canada. Their companion broadcast is Hockey Night Punjabi, and it's an entire hockey broadcast in Punjabi. And there are quite a few, I guess, South Asian Canadian hockey players who kind of look at Hockey Night Punjabi as their entry point into the sport. A lot of players and fans who found their entry point into the sport through that. So I'm reading this book. It's a tough read, but some of the references are really fascinating, and I love how it kind of creates this or presents this interrogation and critique of sports culture as inherently beneficent, and rather it kind of says it is what we make of it, and what are we going to do with this culture because of this this gatekeeping that exists. So
kind of challenges that notion that Canada or even NHL uses, like hockey is for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that idea of and the fact that the NHL is has erased, and we were talking about this, but what has whitewashed so much of it.
Yeah. So I mean, something that I've talked to Scott about on other podcasts is the fact that the first non-Indigenous NHL player to break the color barrier was a Chinese Canadian player named Larry Kuang, but he only got 1 minute of ice time in the NHL, even though he was the MVP of the elite Quebec Senior League, even though he was leagues better than but at least 20 of the players who went before him and got their call up into the NHL. And this was back in 1948. So a few years before Jackie Robinson broke into
Actually,
MLB.
that's the year after he broke in.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right. The year after.
Right
Like
around
Sean
the same
Bella-
time. Yeah.
Yeah, around the same time.
Sean Belleville played with him and said he was one of the greatest players. Toe Blake was his coach and said he would never trade him for anyone. It was just so interesting to hear how esteemed he was by like the greats of the NHL, but he was so held back on purpose just because, the NHL was not ready for that.
1 minute. That's so cruel.
Yeah. And it was 1 minute of ice, the final shift of the game. So he basically, like, when the clock wound down to the last minute of the entire game, he got his chance. So he never went back for another shot at the NHL. He felt insulted by all of that and sort of just left that alone. But he continued to play and was a major ambassador for the game, not just in Canada but across the pond. He went and actually, I think he was the first Asian hockey coach in Switzerland. He helped build Switzerland. I think it was Switzerland. It was either. I'm pretty sure it's Switzerland. It could have been the Czech Republic, but he was out there in Europe building hockey. So
Yeah.
For some context too, if anyone is interested in the topic of hockey and how whitewashed the sport is, Black Ice is it's not a book, but it's a documentary.
It is based on a book.
It's based on a book.
Yeah, it's based on a book on the first African American hockey player in his life. But the documentary kind of opens it up to Black players throughout hockey history, and it's an incredible documentary. Actually, had me in tears by the end of it.
Yeah.
So I know this is a book podcast, but I'll plug a documentary as well.
Yeah.
We'll allow it.
Yeah.
Very much ties into that topic.
Blake's in
of what you're reading
Chicago,
about.
so that's a hockey town, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I grew up in Indiana though, and there was just not much of a hockey presence. And then I also, my father was not he was the sports nut in the house. I grew up going to Purdue football and basketball games. Like they took me to my first Big Ten football game when I was like 3 months old, right? Because we lived very close to Lafayette, where Purdue is. But he had this belief, and still holds it, I'm sure, that like games with low scores are not interesting. So like soccer and hockey were just out.
Oh, come on.
Even and so like I mean I as a kid I did go to there was an IHL team in Indianapolis called the Indianapolis Ice for a while, and that was a blast. And then I went to like a one Blackhawks game when I lived in Chicago. It was a game where they clinched their division against the Predators. So back, you know, when they were really hot, and were on their really hot run in the 2010s.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I really have always enjoyed it when I've gone. It's just not been. I love watching live sports, and I'm a very fair weather TV sports watcher.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really those are both fascinating picks. It reminded me of a book that is also that I had heard of, but it's about basketball.
Okay.
It's by Jean Luen Yang, who wrote American Born Chinese.
Yeah.
That's probably his most famous book. But he's written a lot of Avatar, The Last Airbender, graphic novels and things like that. But he has a book called Dragon Hoops, which is just about like a local high school team. It's been another interview podcast that I listened to just raved over it, from like both a basketball and like gender and racial commentary and all these other things. Because he's not a stranger to that as well, not just on American Born Chinese. He also turned the real life story called Superman Smashes the Klan, and it's basically how in the 30s or 40s these people took the Superman radio show and essentially shamed the KKK out of prominence.
It hit them so hard they were like, dang,
yeah,
I don't want to do this anymore.
So that's another graphic novel that that author has written.
Nice.
But sorry, those are just random bonus picks.
Yeah.
Nice.
But that's what I love, is when one book connects to another, and then you get to just like keep riffing and recommending stuff. So I guess I'll go.
Yeah.
With the next pick. I really like books that are sort of about media studies or technology, that sort of thing. And there's a book that was just released recently by Nicholas Carr, who back in the early 2010s wrote The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, which was a very much like it was a take, it was a book length take, but it was very much about like the fact that we're increasingly connected. And this was in 2010, which feels like such a more innocent time, 2010, 2011. How it how it's affecting our ability to think deeply, to etc. And his new book is called Superbloom: How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart. So it's a similar sort of critique of our social media and our like digital cultures and things like that. It opens, and the title is from is in reference to the occasion in California when there's that super bloom. And I don't know if you remember, and I think it might have even been during COVID or right before. There was this super bloom in an area of California, and all these influencers like went and took pictures with these
Trampled it.
poppies. Yeah, uh, and then after a handful of these big accounts did this stunt, then a whole bunch of normies showed up to copy it, and they broke through state patrol barriers and did all these things and ruined it. And so that's sort of the vibe that he's setting up. But then he looks at various aspects of communications, mass communications in particular, and how it's developed from books to the radio to television to the internet, and every sort of step in that evolution. A lot of these things that are sold to us and marketed to us as ways to be more connected and more informed and all these things. They have all of these worse worse effects as well.
Consequences. Yeah.
Yes, and um, so and it's not all necessarily just like by the seat of his pants. He's pulling from a lot of history and stuff like that.
Right.
And there's definitely like a curmudgeonly element to it at times, but it's still, in my mind, still worth reading. And like this is a whole sort of genre of books. But like another one that I read is called like The Twittering Machine, which was about Twitter's effect on us and that sort of thing. But I've sort of enjoyed it just in as I've sort of wrestled with the fact that I'm primarily known to people who listen to podcasts and things like that because of things like social media, but also what does participating in these things that also ramped up support for the alt-right and and all these other things, is the only option to continue to like respond to Steve Bannon, who's flooding the zone with shit, with like trying to flood the zone with fertilizer? Like, I don't know. Or is there like another path that's available? And that's sort of what I'm trying to think through in reading books like this right now.
Oof. We all met through social media.
Yeah. So it's not to say that it's like evil.
It's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
I met Nate through the internet too.
Wow.
Yeah.
But all it did was land you in America.
I know.
So- Yeah.
It's actually could be a cautionary tale. Like you said, double-edged sword. You meet the love of your life and end up in a country you didn't plan to go to. It's trying to annex your country. It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll all be one big country then. So won't that be nice?
Oh man.
All right. Well, I read a book called Brothers by Alex Van Halen, who is one of my childhood heroes. His brother, Eddie Van Halen, revolutionized rock and roll guitar in the late 70s, all through the 80s. these were heroes of mine that I didn't even realize they were Asian American. Their mother is Indonesian because they were ashamed of it. And Alex used to say he was cursed with like chine eyes or whatever how he pronounced it. But they were white passing enough, kind of like I was bagging on Josh Harris in the last episode because he was Japanese, half Japanese American and hid it. There's still people who don't know that he is because he was ashamed of it, I assume. Or cynically, he knew that he couldn't sell books if people knew. But these two brothers conquered the world. This was the biggest band of the 80s, all on MTV. And so I wanted to read this. You know, I don't trust usually rock stars who tell their own stories because, I don't know. It's talk about unreliable
narrator.
Right.
Are you saying
There's a lot of drugs and alcohol. But this book was kind of a sweet look at it really becomes an immigrant tale of they were uprooted from Indonesia because their father is white and there was some racial tensions and political happenings in the 60s. Gee, what was that in Southeast Asia? Anyway, so they had to move to the Netherlands, where he's from, and then so their formative years were spent speaking Dutch, and just having a regular childhood. And then they moved to Pasadena, California, which is where I live, and I shop at the Mexican market around the corner from where they grew up. So I feel really close to their story, and I really wish I could just give Alex a hug and tell him to embrace his Asian American side. Eddie passed away a couple years ago from cancer, and that was always my dream, was to have a run into him around Pasadena. I don't know, and just tell him how much he meant to me as a nerdy Asian American kid, and talk to him about how cool it was that they were half Indonesian. So Alex is still alive, and he wrote this book, and it's a sweet story about immigrant kids having to. And Pasadena was rough in the 70s when they were coming up. So they had to fight a lot. They got picked on for being foreign. They didn't speak English at first. And so you go from that humble beginning to being like the biggest rock band on the planet. I was just really curious. What was it like to come up in that era, in the neighborhood where I live, and become the biggest rock stars in the world? And so he doesn't tell enough of what was actually happening. It's he picks and chooses what he includes. But for me as a fan, and if you're a fan of rock history and everything, I think this is a good read. It's super light. Unlike Nate's book, there aren't that many words on the page, and there aren't that many pages. There's some cool pictures, though. Usually I read on a Kindle, but I knew there was going to be like archival pictures and pictures of the family that I really wanted to see, and including pictures of the mom who was who had mental health issues too, but he doesn't even talk about that really. For me, it was just, I don't know. It was like a hug for my 12-year-old self who felt so lost. And I was in an all-white school, was one of the only minority kids, and really rock and roll and the anger and the rage that it generates was so healing for me. And it gave me like a sense of identity. Even though I was a good church-going kid, I listened to Petra and what other shitty Christian bands existed in the early to mid 80s. But man, I found my real identity as a musician and an artist in bands like Van Halen, and I'm just so thankful to them for that. Now, these guys were fucked up. As soon as they got big, they took so many drugs and drank, pints and gallons of alcohol every day. It seems like really messed up their relationships, and so I wasn't as interested in that part of the story. I was just interested in the origin, like how do you go from poor immigrant to ruling the world. And it was really nice, and it was a nice I read it in like kind of like Nate. I couldn't put it down, and I think I read this in like a day and a half, just just sitting there, and like it's not long.
Yeah.
But it was a nice little diversion from the world crumbling around me.
Right.
That's awesome. I just added some Van Halen to
Oh
what
yeah.
I need to
So
listen
there's
to.
two Van Halens, and one of the controversies of the book is they start out with the singer David Lee Roth, who was a flamboyant, long blonde hair sex symbol, kind of a dick, um, just super egomaniac, and he leaves the band at the height of their popularity in 1984 or 85, and then they get Sammy Hagar. So that's a lot of the true Van Halen fans don't like they call it the Van Hagar era, but really
Hmm.
they were a much better band. And the songs were much more artfully crafted. So Van
Mm.
Halen 1.0 is raw Eddie just shredding on every song, just about, and I love it. It's great. With the Sammy Hagar years, you get more hits. It's more
Mm.
accessible. Eddie started playing more keyboards. Um, I just see him as two different bands. But so the controversy was Alex did not write a single sentence about the Sammy Hagar era, which which was
Uh,
literally 3 times as long as the original era.
right.
So there's some bad blood there and some relationships that have to be mended. Um, so yeah, it's like I said,
Which era was the song Jump? I'm just
that was the
curious.
very end of the David Lee Roth era.
Oh.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
there's an album called 1984, which my church going friends were very upset with me for buying it because the cover is like this baby angel smoking a cigarette, which seems tame now, but man, that pissed off the Christians. They're like, "How dare you!" Not to mention the first song on the very first Van Halen record is called "Running with the Devil," and I couldn't really
Right.
figure out a way to spin that. It was just yeah, you got me there, but it's a good song. So that's me.
So
That's young Scott
nice.
finding some closure in reading about the brothers and these guys they're the kind of brothers. I don't know if you follow like other bands like Oasis or
Mhm.
the Black Crows. Whenever you have brothers in a band, it can get pretty tumultuous. So these guys would beat the shit out of each other like physically,
God.
and then be crying and hugging each other and telling them each other they love each other. And so it was pretty tumultuous.
Mm. Yeah.
Hmm.
So we'll connect the world of Van Halen to the world of hockey.
Yeah.
We live and I work like really close to Prudential Center where the New Jersey Devils play. And of course, because they're the New Jersey Devils, there's a lot of Van Halen that's played at the
Running
games.
with the devil.
Oh yeah. Yep. Oh, and you were mentioning you read on a Kindle. I read on the Rival. The
Yeah, I saw
Kobo.
you hold that
That's-
up, and then you said you had a long book. I'm like, that book looks tiny. What is?
Yeah,
Is
no-
it a pamphlet? Oh no, it's a e-reader. Yeah.
It's an e-reader.
Nice.
Is it
I
color?
do both.
Do you like
yeah,
the?
this one I got the Kobo with the color screen.
Oh, okay, I just read on
yeah.
a plain white Kindle, white page, white
Yeah,
paper.
I want to
white.
make the switch to Kobo. Like right when I was one of those people that like 2 months, like at the end of February
Mhm.
2025, they were like, guess what? If you have a Kindle, you can no longer download copies of your books.
That's so
That's
shitty.
only a license at this point,
Yep.
and you're locked in even more.
Mhm.
So I downloaded my entire archive, and
I
then
missed that.
used some software called Caliber
Yeah.
to it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
lots of YouTube videos about it, but I want to move to Kobo's.
Kobo. Is it with a C or a K?
A K.
A K?
Yeah.
That
All right, I'm
sounds
looking
right.
into that. Shit.
Scott, you should really look into it. It is Kobo started as a Canadian company, and they were bought by Rakuten, and now they are the Rakuten answer to the Kindle.
All right.
So come on, you're
So this is
Japanese
Yeah.
American.
They
Information
have
for
some
our
cool,
listeners
like,
too.
Yeah.
The Kobo Libra Color. Is that the one you have? I think maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
that was the
Yeah.
model I was looking at.
Yeah.
We should get a
Um,
sponsorship.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
should. Yeah. So yeah, that's the at the end we like to have a little bit of a bonus question to round things out and go back around the table again. So we did talk a little bit about how you read, whether it's on a Kindle or whatever. But my final question, bonus question, is: do you have a favorite place to read, either in your house or somewhere else?
I definitely do. I don't do I do audiobooks all the time.
Oh, okay.
So I do a lot of driving, and so yeah, most of it is in my car when I'm on long trips.
Yeah,
I
it's
am
the best.
listening to books. And I'm just giving a shout out to people who like listening to books, because I know sometimes it's easy to feel like that's not, or to feel shame like that doesn't
No, we
count
should have said at
as-
the top.
We don't do
We are
that.
all for the audiobooks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and to add a
And-
little bit of nerdiness to this, apparently the same synapses in your brain that fire off when you're reading
I was gonna
text
say
visually
something to that effect.
are doing the exact same thing in your brain when you're listening. So
Yep.
it is still reading.
And I'll say
Yeah.
this too. There's something, maybe it's just the way that I learned too, but about hearing a person's voice when they're reading their story, and it's not in my voice imagining what they're saying, but actually hearing the inflections of their, like when I listened to your audiobook, Scott, I loved it, because I know you, and I could hear it, and I could hear where you're sarcastic. I could hear where you're like, the tone of voice kind of conveys something that I might have read something else into the text.
Yeah.
So I like audiobooks because I get to get a feel for the person through their tones. So
Yeah. Same.
Question for you, Blake. Did you read your audiobook?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah,
Okay.
I did.
All right. I guess I'll have to get the audiobook version of that.
Yeah. What's Blake sound like
Yeah.
when he's reading his book?
Yeah.
Probably similar to this.
Yeah.
But you've got a good sense. Nate, what about you? Do you have a favorite place to read?
I have a favorite. It's not my go-to so much anymore. I find myself just reading in bed at the end of the day. But there's a in our apartment, right in front of the window in the living room, I've got this little recliner couch type of thing. And then I just grab my ottoman, put my feet up, and that's where I like to read, with the natural light coming through because of the way that our house is angled.
With a glass of whiskey.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't had whiskey in a long time.
Uh-oh.
But yeah,
Sad.
yeah, I know it is sad. I've been really, really busy. So
Yeah. All right. I don't have a favorite place. So, although I like waiting rooms because it gives you something to do. And toward the end of my church going days, I may or may not have snuck books into church services because I was bored as fuck. So,
nice.
For me, there are a couple of places in the house. This is our first house, so we feel like thankful that we were always in, before COVID, we lived in Chicago, so we were in either an apartment or a condo. But now that we're in the suburbs and have a home, we have a living room that in the last year we did add a record player. Yet, like, we're very much people of our, of our cohorts got into vinyl or whatever.
yeah.
And that's happening. And putting on a record in there is very nice. And then in the warmer months, we also do have like a sunroom that's just on the other side of the house that gets a lot of really lovely sun. And so if it's during the colder months, then I'm in the living room by the fire, and in the warmer months, I like going to the sunroom. And those are my favorite spots. So
Nice.
Nice.
yeah. Well, thank you everyone for sharing what you are reading. We will be putting all the links to all the books mentioned in the show notes so that you can purchase them. And we will have a little bit of a bookshop.org affiliate thing. So if you purchase
Awesome.
things
Yeah.
from our show notes, then that will help offset the costs of publishing this show and all that fun stuff. And it's just a fun way to support both us and independent bookstores, which are vital parts of reading
Yeah.
and supporting your local
Ooh,
community.
I have a quick question. What's your local bookshop?
For me, there's one called Yellowbird Books that is the closest bookstore to us, and it's awesome. It's
Nice.
just opened in the last year.
Nice.
So
Shout out to Octavia's Bookshelf. It's a Black-owned bookstore up the street from where I live.
Cool. And for us, it's Watchung Booksellers, also a Black woman-owned bookshop right over in Montclair, New Jersey.
Nice.
and we can add the links to their. We should collect the URLs so
Yeah.
that
Oh,
we
yeah.
can mention them too.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess we're 2 days late, but happy Indie Bookshop Day.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Finally, want to thank Gail and Nate, both of you, for joining us.
Yeah.
What else do you want to plug as far as your other shows? Anything else you want to mention where people can follow you online? All that great stuff. Anything you want to plug here at the end?
I'm gonna plug Nate's Asians in Hockey. I'm so excited about.
that's my plug.
I know, but I'm supporting you behind the scenes. I'm like, I'm making suggestions and very invested in all of it. So even if I'm not up front.
Yeah, you can find Asians in Hockey wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome.
And the full Mutuality podcast, which you all
Yes,
are
of
known for.
course.
So, yeah.
Yes, and we'll have links to the
We haven't-
Dauntless Network and everything else.
Yeah, we haven't been as up to date on that, so that
Yeah.
hasn't been lately on our list. But
That is very
we'll get back to it
relatable.
eventually. Yeah.
We've got episodes in the hopper that we still need to sit down and edit, so it's not like
Yeah.
we're completely closed. We just haven't. I mean, yeah, this whole season has just been rough on
Things are
on-
not good.
No,
Yeah. We're not in normal times.
no, we're not.
So
Yeah,
so sometimes the podcasts, they don't ship when you want them to. That's okay.
very real.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
thank you both for
Yeah,
coming on.
thank you for putting this together.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk About Text with Blake and Scott. That's me. If you're interested in coming on to talk about a book that you've really loved or that you're reading right now, let us know. Reach out to us at talkabouttextpod@gmail.com. Hope to hear from you, and we'll see you next week.